Hello, my darlings. Madam Raven here with a little romance for your Valentine's Day. This is a special video because it not only brings in my love of the creatures of the Fae, but my love of steampunk. And this story was written by yours truly. Now, I haven't quite got it finished, so if you like it, and if you like steampunk, let me know. I've got more steampunk stories lined up coming ahead, but this one has a little romance in it for you. Happy Valentine's Day. I give you Tam Lin. Wee Janet lay on her back beneath the rough-hewn bench, her soft black curls falling to the floor as she kicked her feet up, pinning Bobby to the underside of the bench with her bare feet. She'd had Bobby since she was one herself. Nurse had sewn her out of scraps as she watched over young Janet's cradle. Brute groaned and snuffled with his grizzled muzzle, taking upon himself to watch Janet now that her mother and Nurse was busy with the new baby, a son and future laird. No one knew she was there as the business and squabbles that her father presided over in the great hall continued. Janet loved her father dearly. He was always so cheerful and playful with her, even when Nurse was cross or exasperated with her. Her father never was. He was tall and strong, with the dark Celtic look he gave to his daughter, black hair and bright cornflower blue eyes, crinkled at the edges by smiles in the sun. The chill of the evening was driven away by the fire burning in the great hall, and the sound of her father's voice was making Janet content and almost sleepy. Suddenly, the hubris of voices died away. "All out!" commanded Janet's father. Janet crawled under the table to see what was going on as the men of the land shuffled out. When the last left the hall and shut the door, all that was left was the laird, an old knight of the land, Janet's mother, a man Janet had not seen before, and the daughter of the old knight. The daughter had been crying, her red eyes brought out more by her pale freckled skin and copper hair that flashed in the firelight. Her chin was stuck out defiantly, but her fear was nearly palpable. "Robert has travelled down here from Motherwell. He's agreed to take you to his bride, Maggie," the laird said kindly. Maggie didn't answer, still seeming to be held fast with terror and pride. "Speak up, lass," shouted her father. "You cannot be choosy in your condition." The old knight spit the last word. Maggie gave a barely perceived nod. Her erstwhile groom gave her a tentative smile. He was obviously many years her senior. Janet's mother, regal and straight in bearing, with light brown, straight hair and the aquiline nose Janet bore, was not many years older than the frightened bride. She whispered, "He'll be good to ye, dear, dinna fret." With that encouragement, the young lady took the hand of the man she would leave with. The laird handed a small sack that jingled with coin to the one called Robert and shook his hand. After the new couple had silently departed, the old knight turned. "I'm forever in your debt. Dinna fash," said the lady. "Robert will treat her and the child very well." "Did she say who was to blame for her disgrace?" asked the laird. The old knight, embarrassed, and his weary face grew dark. "She would only say 'twas a man in Carterhaugh." Janet's mother gasped. "Not again," the lord sighed and said. "From hereforth I forbid maidens to go to Carterhaugh." His face was grave and angry. "If we cannot rid this plague of a love-talker from the place, the devil's own may keep it to themselves." At the loud and angry sounds of the exchange, Brute gave a loud bark, revealing their hiding place. The laird's face softened at the sight of his precocious toddler. "What are you doing there, me bonny wee child?" Extending his arms to her, Janet jumped to her feet and ran into her father's arms. Janet had grown into a truly wild beauty, as was kindly put by the old knights of the hall. The women, as is often the case, were more critical. Arrogant, willful, foolish, stubborn, and disobedient were more oft used by the clucking female tongues. Her mother had died a few short years after her brother Alec was born. Another baby boy, but he didn't survive either. It had aged her father very quickly. While Alec was still being groomed for lairdhood, at 17, Janet had run wild and run things her way for years. She flew into the kitchen from the yard like a chilly spring breeze, her dark, unbound curls bobbing, her court of ladies in her wake like a flock of birds. Through her kitchen and down into the hall she flounced, and onto the hearth rug with her dog, Bridie, a descendant of Brute. Slapping out a welcome with her tail, she began sorting through the wild berries they had picked as the other young ladies took up their embroidery. She picked out sticks and bugs and leaves. Bridie nuzzled her head into her mistress's lap. Soon the chitter of talk among the ladies had begun. It began with the same old stuff, and Janet held her tongue. Her thoughts as the young and not-so-young men were talked of, and their suitability discussed and weighed. As the tone of the conversation changed to more secretive and dark whispers, Janet turned her attention to what was being said. "No one's been there in years. The laird will not allow it," says Kate. "Yet the gardens are always attended so fair." "Oh, some have been there." Leslie lowered her voice. "Old Farmer Fletcher's daughter used to creep off there. Spent an awful amount of time in the woods nearby. Now she's gone to live with her aunt off by the loch. Been there nigh on 9 months. Reckon she'll be back again soon." She looked about with a pointed expression. "I heard she all but pined away, aunts or no," broke in timid little Ginny, pulling her fair hair off her face. They say Carter Hall is haunted by a love-talker, that he's been there, or court to the Queen of the Fae, for well over 20 years. She rushed out the words as though she was hurrying their escape before they were found. "The laird would not approve of such talk in this hall," Nurse nearly bellowed. "This is a Christian household, and the Fae are naught but demons in fair clothes," she sniffed. "Likewise they hear when we speak of them, and they can come with trouble." Janet returned to the berries, all excitement now gone again from the prattle. She stared into the flames, as a seed took root, more from the stomping of it than the laying of it. A willful and curious flame began in her ungoverned mind. Tom had finished checking the new seeds. He was so encouraged by the results. They were all potable and showed nice growth. Everything was so very encouraging. He had wonderful news to pass to Her Majesty for once. Tom wiped his brow with the back of his wrist, just above his work glove. He could smell the dark, rich soil. Tom was tall, with a muscular yet slender build. His straight black hair and eyes a sure sign of his half-Chinese heritage. If only he could be sure the seeds could survive in the polluted soil with black rain. Stage 2. Fewer seeds and tubers have passed the test. The Ada made the annoying ringing sound that let him know he was summoned again. With a sigh, he took off his gloves and tucked them in his back pocket, and walked to the desk. Turning a knob with a strange whoo sound, the bulging screen, much like a ship's porthole, sprung to life, and his perfectly coiffed, highly fashioned boss popped into view with her enduring scowl in place. She looked like she had just discovered a nasty bug, and Tom was it. Well, she would never waste time on small talk, not with anyone whom she felt she was in control of. It was said you could judge a person by how they treated those under them. Tom felt enormously sorry for her lady's maid, and any servant she ran across day to day. "Nice to see you, Lenora. Looks like the country was nice this year. I trust you relieved enough remaining foxes and birds of their lives," Tom sardonically said. Lenora didn't twitch so much as a muscle. With a sigh, Tom continued, "The latest batch has done well in the lower light conditions. However, I haven't gotten them through the rotten soil and dirty air yet. The seeds are pure genetically, and if they're strong enough to thrive in the modern conditions, we may see a great decrease in hunger. Africa is the least contaminated, and Africa's too far to be profitable. Once airships or train transport is factored, and the indigenous people couldn't afford the cost either," she snapped, cutting him off. Lenora's father was the owner of the largest company still remaining in what was left of England. "Anyway, that decision has very little to do with you, Tom. You are hired as a research botanist. That's all. You have no say in what we do with the seeds, so keep that in mind with your delusions of saving the world." The picture blurred out and vanished again, reminding Tom of a gypsy's crystal ball. "I'm not sure who I'm trying to save the world for," mumbled Tom to himself, shuddering to think that eventually only people like Lenora and her family would have any life to speak of at all in the end. Shaking his head, he pulled the gloves from his back pocket, shoved up the sleeves on his white button-up shirt, and headed for the door of the lab. Turning the large iron key, he stepped into the bright sunlight. The door behind him slid closed, leaving a stone wall without a trace. The spring was almost giving way to summer. He had actually skipped the winter and late autumn with a blink of the eye, needing only the growing months and lots of seasons for new seeds. He'd been jumping time weeks or months at a time for the long, lonely time he had been there. Well, occasionally lonely. He thought of Susan Fletcher, and a smile played on his lips. Phytogenic Investigations, the child company Her Majesty ran, would not be pleased with the dalliances he had had over the years here. Butterfly wings flapping, causing the sky pirates to rule the world in the future, and so forth. He had thought that any change would be good in that case anyway. But nothing in his time had changed with the encounters, so he'd quit worrying about it. His roses were budded and about to bloom. Everything was so very green and gorgeous. He thought that even as a botanist he would get sick of it, or grow used to the wonderful smells and sights of a fertile green land. But every day was just as glorious. He took a deep breath and felt the warm sun on his face. Paradise indeed. Her seemingly endless chores taken care of, Janet snuck out through the woods. It was silly to think a love-talker would lurk in old Carter Hall, but if such things did exist, it would be something to see. Janet was sure she was bloody-minded enough not to fall for some fairy charms. Still, her footfall slowed as she neared the ruined shell of the castle. Just inside the stone wall, stunningly beautiful flowers made Janet catch her breath. The lovely roses that grew around the kitchen garden were simple and plain to these huge, lovely sculptures of deep red, white, and pink. Some small and climbing the wall, others stood tall with larger blooms. The fragrance was different than the roses Janet was used to. Not so strong, but just as sweet. Janet reached out and broke off a stem with 2 large blood-red roses, pricking her finger in the process. As she stuck her finger in the mouth to stop the bleeding, a loud, angry voice startled her. "I beg your pardon, miss," Tom shouted irately. "Do you generally go around destroying other people's property?" Janet, not used to being caught out or yelled at, actually blushed. something she hadn't done since she was 10, and her father caught her trying to lift and practice with his sword. "All property around here belongs to my father, the laird." She sounded more petulant than she planned, and realized she sounded very childish. "Well then, my lady, I would be most grateful if you would pull no more," Tom snapped. Janet took a moment and took in the strange man before her. His tall stance, dark hair, and most handsome features. But it was his eyes that made her heart stop in her throat. Almond-shaped eyes, like people said the Fae have. His clothes were of a very fine material, and of a cut she had never seen. Well-fit trousers, fine linen shirt, with buttons up to front, and some sort of bright red straps that fastened to the front of his trousers, went over his shoulders and crossed in the back, fastening again. The brown leather belt around his waist, with tools and strange things she could not identify. "Well," the handsome man glared, "why are you just going around breaking my branches?" "The roses are most beautiful," Janet said softly, then, not to appear weak and fearing trouble, put up a blustery front. "My father is in charge of this land and gave Carter Hall to me to do with as I please." The tall man gave her a smirk. "Is that so?" His eyes softened. "If that's the case, come as often as you please. You shame my roses with the light of your beauty." Janet wondered if he was teasing. She was dirty and had brambles and sticks in her hair. She hadn't been aware of such things before. There was a sweetness in his face. "Why are your roses so special?" she asked. She reached over and gently caressed a blooming bud. "These roses, my lady, will save the world." Janet would have laughed, but there was no humor in his glance, just warmth and invitation. Janet started to feel a bit uncomfortable. Could he really be a love-talker? A good neighbor who could make a girl pine to her death after an exchange like this? Save the world? How can a rose save the world? Tom was really liking this girl. She had a spirit and intelligence he hadn't encountered in this wild world. He could see she was a bit nervous, and he definitely did not want her to flee. Step closer or back up? He stood still and said softly, "Not your world, darling, but mine." "So you are a Fae," Janet blurted, taking a step back from the ruins. "A what?" Tom asked, a puzzled expression on his face. "A Fae, the fair folk, the good neighbors," she hurled at him. "You ken a fairy," almost whispering that last epithet at him. You never wanted to call them down on you or incur their wrath. Tom laughed. "A fairy? Me? No." He laughed again. Janet never liked feeling like she was being lied to, and as there was no other explanation for this beautiful man in front of her, she stepped forward and countered, "You must be. You've been here at least my entire life, and you look nearly as young as myself. Women who come here are often shamed and set off to marriage or pine away for you, and the look of your black eyes, beautiful, but as described as what the fairies have." Tom took the opening. How could he not? "You think my eyes are beautiful? They aren't black, but deep brown. Come closer and see for yourself." The Janet took a step towards the young man and caught herself. "No, thank you," she spouted. "I'll not have you bewitch me any more." "Really?" Tom smirked. He was beginning to enjoy himself. He lowered his voice and leaned forward. "I don't think I'm the one doing the bewitching, my lady." Janet huffed and took a deep breath. Leaving would be wise, but she'd never seen a man so confident and handsome. Never a man like this. "If you're no Fae, what do you mean by your world?" Tom strode forward a bit, away from the warm wall, and sat in the green grass a few feet away. He looked over his shoulder and patted the grass with a casual smile. She was sharp, but how much to tell her? If she could believe in fairy tales, Could she believe in a future with time travel, airships, and all manner of amazing and heartbreaking facts? Janet paused. She nearly bolted, but in for a penny, in for a pound. Just remember all she had learned from Nanny and the women around the court. Don't eat anything he gives you. Don't dance with him. What else? She couldn't think. She moved forward, almost not of her own accord, and sat about 3 handspans away from him. Tom leaned over and whispered, "I promise not to bite." Janet should have been offended or frightened, but his smile was so endearing, she smiled back. Yuck! What was wrong with her? She wasn't one of those simpering, giggling girls she always found annoying. She decided to ignore his last comment. "Well?" she asked archly. "What world are you from, then, eh?" He crossed his scuffed brown boots at the ankle and laid back. Gazing to the west, his lovely face grew sad. "A dying world," he sighed, "with poison air and poison water. A world without sunlight. Not real sunlight, but an orange-red dingy light, where plants struggle to grow, and hunger takes more and more lives every day." Janet felt the sadness and hopelessness in his voice, but the thought of such a place was so alien to her own experience of life. The sun was all. Clean water, green plants. It was her whole world. No light or air, poison ground. What else would there be? Death? She looked at his profile and softly asked, "What made your world so?" He knew he had got her, but did he really want to tell her? How did the conversation get to this point? No other girl had gotten him to talk about his home. He looked at her cornflower eyes, framed by the dark, thick lashes. She was such a beauty, a wild beauty by the looks of her hair and apparel, but a beauty just the same. "You really want to know?" "Yes." Tom took a deep breath and looked again to the green, sun-splattered west. "I was born in a future land, a future filled with wonders you would never believe, but bleak and gray." He glanced back at Janet, her eyes so full of curiosity. "But where to start?" he mumbles. "The cities are huge, or would be to you. I work out of London, which you would have heard about, but I was born and raised in a city called Denver, nearly half the world away, on a land you've never heard of, a land larger than the size of Europe. Half that land is unlivable now. Pollution from the large cities on both coasts make all but the center scenes of desolation." "Pollution? What would that be?" asked Janet, imagining monsters or disease. "Pollution is particulars in the air. Think of the smoke from a fire. It stings your eyes and makes it hard to breathe if you're close enough. Now imagine that everywhere, and not just smoke. Chemicals and coal and every nasty, used thing to create or run something. Machines of metal and steel on the road, like a carriage, spewing steam and coal and wood to make itself run from one place to another," Tom explained. "By themselves? How can they think? Is it magic you use to do these things?" No, Tom laughed. "They have drivers like carriages or traps do. Although some are working on Adas to get them to think on their own." Quickly anticipating her next question, he went on. "Adas are machines that can do things like calculations, math, to help do complicated things. A woman, Ada Lovelace, a daughter of a famous poet and lord, and a man called Babbage created these things using maths. Look, I know this is difficult to understand, but they can do all sorts of things. One brought me back to your time and place." She really was lovely. Janet thought for a moment, picking stems of the long grass. Hesitantly, she said, "So, is it something you cannot explain that does wondrous things. It can be either miracles or magic. She leaned closer to Tom with an ironic gleam in her eye. And I know you are na saint, love talker. Tom laughed and reached for her hand, which she retracted. No, that I am not, he said. All right, my lady. Call it magic if you must. My world doesn't look too magical to an insider, however. Machines on wheels and on legs, people crowding the streets, buildings almost as tall as mountains. If you live on the top, no problems. But most struggle working hard in factories. Factories are larger buildings where things are made using machinery again. Huge wheels as tall as your keep turning, run by steam and running the machines to make clothes, goods, and other machines. Tom glanced around again. I'm so lucky to get my job. You see, I'm good at growing things, and my world is starving. Things can't grow on scorched earth. They can't grow in poisoned ground and poison air. I'm here, my dear. Say, what's your name? Part of her didn't want to answer. Names have power. She knew that. Everyone did. If she said, would he pin her heart to this ground? Would she be happy nowhere but Carter Hall? She felt a prick of fear and adrenaline, but showed a calm exterior. Janet? My name's Janet. Tam Lin, he smiles back. Tam Lin? Close enough, he smirked, leaning over and gave her the gentlest of kisses. Janet was a brave girl, and though believing him to still be a dangerous creature from another place, she felt it a dare and returned the kiss. She pulled back, intrigued by the land Tam was creating in her mind. So you went out and decided to use this Ada thing to come here to the real world, she blurted. No, they aren't that easy to get, and one as detailed and powerful as the one I have, well, they aren't even generally known to exist. I was hired to work by a company, that is, I hope, going to solve the problems. At least they will pay me enough to live on, even if I can't save the world. Tam looked wistful. My boss, the lady who runs it, is a real ice queen. Mean as... He was stuck for a simile Janet would understand. Mean as two stags in spring. Janet giggled. Not for the same reason, I hope. Tam laughed with her. No, that's where the ice comes in. She likes no one per se. Though if you have a certain male charm, you have a better chance of getting favors. Maybe it wasn't just my skills with plants that got me here, Tam teased. Janet pushed him playfully. She noticed the sun was getting too low in the sky. I must go, she said, jumping to her feet. I shouldn't be caught out in the dark, especially coming from here. She brushed the grass off her skirt. Even with the same dried mud on her hem and sticks and leaf in her hair, Tom stood and caught her elbow and pulled her in for another kiss. Longer this time. Will you come back? He asked. Maybe, she said with a coquettish smile, and ran off in the direction of home. So quoth this raven,